Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's uLaw webinar. I welcome you to the Legal Office Client Management webinar today, which has been approved for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. So I repeat, and I've also put this out in my chat message, that today's webinar is accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits, and look forward to walking you through this webinar, the way you actually go ahead, and the subject that you use to get these credits is the Law Office Client Management. So that's really the title of today's webinar. Okay. Once again, I kindly request you to mute your phone lines, to please use the chat window during any time on this webinar to ask us questions with regards to today's webinar. If there's anything that you want to ask us as a company with regards to our product or services, feel free to email us at support@uLawPractice.com or visit us on our website. And look forward to welcoming, and just give us a minute for getting everybody joined in. Okay, and let's get going. Like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has a specific agenda, even so because of the nature of it being a CPD. And we're going to focus on one of the most fundamental steps that every legal professional takes in his or her career, whether it's a solo practice, it's a joint venture, whether it's a large legal firm, law firm, or if it's a small legal firm. And the fundamental step is that of being able to intake that first client, second client, really any client, and walking them through various stages of the life cycle of dealing with the correspondence, the relationship building, and really getting it to a point where you engage with them either through a retainer letter or an engagement letter that gives you the opportunity to create a new file or matter, and of course, hopefully be able to walk through a very positive life cycle of that matter, really taking it from cradle to grave, being able to represent them as their legal representative. Depending on the area of practice, of course, the tenure of that representation is going to vary. But really, the client intake is almost fundamentally that first step. In many regards, it's really the first step for almost any business. You know, whether that's a bakery store, whether that's Canadian Tire, whether it's a large IT firm. Whoever has a service to offer, of course, one of the first steps is to be able to welcome, appreciate, and of course, serve that client. But when it comes to the legal industry, there are, of course, some of those nuances in terms of the documentation, the procedures, and the process that you need to keep in mind and document through that life cycle. And those are the things that we're going to talk about today in further detail. Okay? We're, of course, going to talk about the modern legal professional, the advent of technology, and how that's evolved over a period of time, empowering you as today's legal professional to be able to take advantage of those fundamental groundbreaking changes technology has provided for not only operational efficiencies, but also being able to serve and represent that client faster and more effectively. And the client intake process is no exception. So really what I'm trying to talk about is, let's assume 20 years back, a typical client intake would have been a legal office, a physical address, which still is true in today's day and age, but things are changing. People are getting virtual offices, and there's the virtual lawyer that we talk about. But let's say, just say 20, 25 years back, you needed that physical location. People would walk in. The advertisement was through radio. The advertisement was through paper, through press, through any other marketing means, flyers, etc. Right? The obligations as a legal professional for the kind of documentation that you need to do hasn't necessarily changed drastically. The process, documentation, how you meet, greet, and represent that client hasn't changed. But the process and the means and the different channels through which you intake clients, of course, have changed with time and with technology. So today, if we were to compare that someone would come in and walk into an office as an example, today you have the opportunity to have a website where you're welcoming prospective customers almost 24 hours by 7. So any interested party should be able to knock on that website of yours, be able to share some pertinent information that you'd like to capture about that client that gets sent to you by email. Of course, it could be sent directly into your practice management software. There's many automation that you can actually accomplish with that channel. This could be a text that you get on your phone, allows you to respond back to the client in a more timely fashion. And then you go one step further with technology today. The website itself can be modern enough to be able to do that initial screening, not a conflict check, but just an initial screening could be based on the area of practice. Maybe there are certain geographies that you don't really work, and if the person does enter that information, the website by itself could have some kind of a letter or email that politely tells them that you don't work here and what options you can offer. So legal space would come up when you really talk about client intake. The specific job function is really evolving in a fast pace. So the compliance documents with the evolution of technology and these different channels are also slowly but surely evolving. So what necessary steps do you have to take as you intake that client? What are the roles and responsibilities that you have as a legal professional that you need to take care of, right? If you have conducted the appropriate conflict checks, what is the outcome of that conflict check? You need to determine if it makes sense and if there's no conflict to represent this client, and then go ahead with the next step of creating a file, accepting a retainer, etc. If there is a conflict, then you have two options. One is to be able to convince yourself on paper and be able to provide enough guidance or information for the law society to convince them of why you represent this client despite the conflict. Maybe there's new information that allows you to make that decision. Majority of times, if there's a conflict, we find legal professionals either sending them a non-conflict document, a non-engagement letter, and many times referring them to another colleague who may necessarily not have a conflict, right? General, normal things that happen today. But it's important that that process and the documentation that then follow are part of that client intake process. Because when you do get audited, of course, a lot of the audit questions are around the general ledgers, trust ledgers, your journals, and the financial aspects and documents of your business. But many times, client intake, matter management, and some of the more peripheral aspects of how you organize yourself as a business, as a legal business, how you represent yourself to the common public, those are aspects that auditors are keenly looking at as well. In terms of law society requirements, after you've done a client intake, so this could be an in-person intake, this could be through the website, this could be over the phone, and you may have various technologies behind these various channels to, manually enter this or automate this process. So that's operational efficiency, but when it comes to law society compliance, you still have to follow some of these guidelines. One, of course, have a verification, a client ID verification. The Law Society of Ontario, British Columbia, New Brunswick, some of the other provinces, Alberta, have some, and in fact, all the provinces in Canada, I have to say, do have good documented guidelines for the kind of client or verification document that you need to fill out as a supporting document to your claim that you have done the verification. So a good example is if someone walks in and you do a client intake, always attach with that, whether digitally or in a manila folder, the information of that client with a scanned copy of their any photo ID. Could be their driver's license, could be their passport, right? And then follow it also with this client ID verification compliance document that has a bunch of simple questions that you can answer that in a very self-sufficient manner explains to the Law Society auditor when you get audited what were the conditions based on which you move forward with this client intake. Okay, so it's very straightforward. The minute you do it, you don't have to deal with questions that you didn't have the answers for. You already have all these answers. Makes that audit process far more simpler. Going down the path of assuming there is no conflict, part of that, of course, it's bordering client intake matter management, but that logical handshake between these two different life cycles is that letter of engagement, whether it's a retainer letter or engagement letter, whatever that may be. That's the golden handshake between that phase from client intake to moving into matter of file management, right? So for those who did join us a bit late, I'm going to reiterate that today's webinar's topic is Law Office Client Management has been approved for 1 hour of CPD credits, as mentioned in my initial notes, and thank you very much for joining us. So retainer letter, source of contact, that's another really nice document, and the Law Society has a few reasons for why they ask that sometimes as part of your audit is, again, making sure that you're not just running a referral business, that you actually are able to quantify the different areas of practice that you're able to represent through your legal firm, and also be able to be good at it by capturing and measuring the various marketing channels that are working for you and where you're getting these clients in general from. Okay, so we currently have customers after they started generating and keenly looking at these reports, being able to make way better decisions, smart decisions about their marketing budget and where they want to spend their money based on the constant tracking and measuring of the source of contact. So it's not only a compliance document, it's actually a fantastic business document that helps you in expanding your business through smart decisions. And of course, you have other documents or jurisdictional. Certain provinces even ask for credit card authorization. That could be part of your legal file keeping process as well. Okay, so client intake is something we're going to talk about. The compliance documents that follow is something we're going to talk about. And then, of course, we're going to talk about how technology helps you today to do these tasks faster. Because when, two important things for the health of a business, increase in revenue and decrease in the cost of operating, right? So automation, faster processes, using software, any automation that helps to take away manual tasks allows not only to bring down the cost, but also gives you more time to do other high-value jobs, right, within your legal life. Of course, we'll spend some time talking about the types of analytics that empowers you with the kind of data that you need to either follow up with clients for payments or whatever that data gives you as information. Now, the client intake, this particular slide, in fact, for those who do join us, our webinar will be familiar. This is part of an excerpt from our Everything Practice Management CPD, where one of the first professional obligations that we talk about that every legal professional does have is the client intake. So kind of keeping up with time, I'll try and walk through this real quick. So we spoke about how important it is to have a multi-channel approach for today's legal professional to invite customers, invite clients. But once they're in the house, in the office, and they've given some information, it's very important for you to act quickly so that you can earn their trust and their business. So one of the first steps that you would take is ensuring that you have a detailed recording of that conversation and that personal interaction, whatever it may be. Have a process, a system, product, software, whatever it may be, to be able to capture that information of what they provide you with. Now, what is the reason for them to visit you? What's the specific legal matter that they would like for you to represent? Address, phone number, etc. Right away, have a process to be able to quickly do a conflict check as you're continuing the conversation. And this is something that can be done by yourself if you're a sole practitioner. If you're a law firm, this is something, of course, that your front desk personnel would actually be empowered to do. So it comes down to who within the company runs these things. But whether it's an individual or if it's a distributed responsibility, it's important that it gets done, right? And we spoke about that handshake. So once a determination has been done in terms of a conflict having gone through, it's perfect, no conflicts, I want to move forward with creating a matter and moving forward with the client, then of course you start to document the actual relationship, the legal relationship that you now have with this customer. And that legal entity is that of that retainer or engagement letter that clearly outlines the collateral for fees, the expectations and the roles and responsibilities of both your firm as well as the customer in that relationship, right? To be able to pay you on time. If you agreed upon 30 days, of course, you're expecting the client to pay you. If there's a certain top-up of the retainer letter needs to most certainly articulate that as part of that letter and as part of that obligation that your customer is signing up for with your firm. Now, the last step, very important. If you see that X symbol right at the end, you're going to notice that we talk about this particular aspect quite often. Yes, it's all great, when we start the file, even after no conflict, you start the file, you get, maybe a bit into the matter. But if at any given time, whether it's your customer or even importantly yourself, don't find that comfort or for whatever reason need to not engage. Maybe you found some information much later which was not given to you earlier on, which may have led to a conflict of interest. Could have been the style of working. Maybe they're not paying you on time, not giving you information on time. It's not allowing you to be that legal representative, the qualified and experienced, well-reputed personnel that you are or your firm is. Then of course you have the option or should have the option of non-engaging that client with a valid reason. And that's part of that retainer letter as well, which says at any given time for these very set conditions that my firm has set up, the firm, and for these set of conditions that we allow you to set up, both the client and or the legal firm should be able to non-engage, right? And that is a very important aspect of that client intake's logical closure. And that's why we have that. Okay? We quite often talk about the retainer letters, and I'm just going to skim through this real fast. But keep in mind, as you devise that retainer letter or that engagement letter for your firm, that you keep in mind some of these important components that need to go into that document. So the nature and scope of matter, we spoke about the responsibilities of the client and the firm, of course. Scheduling and course of representation could be the retainer termination details. So we spoke about the non-engagement clause. The client confidentiality, ensuring that you give them that comfort that there is a client confidentiality agreement between you and the firm and the client. And of course, the method and the frequency and the risks involved with the various channels of communication between you and the client. So again, this particular webinar is being recorded and will be available for you to consume later next week. So I'm just going to pause for a real quick minute so that you have a look at it, but then really keep in mind that these important components are kept in mind when you create those retainer letters. Okay, so let's cut to the chase. What compliance documents are auditors really looking for as part of that? Okay, someone's actually trying to present this. You probably have to join, so I'm going to deny you real quick, but then you have to click on the join meeting to join the meeting. So I can't, unfortunately, let you present this. So what are the compliance documents that someone's looking for, right? Client ID verification document for clients and for corporations or businesses that you represent. So it could be the business document, could be tax documents, whatever it may be. Client intake form. Now, this is a very interesting document. The client intake form is something that the Law Society gives you a template, a guideline to follow in terms of the types of detailed information that you capture about a specific client, right? Now, with the advent of technology, what you could do is you can take that intake, make it part of the process, or make it as part of an outcome of a process that you already have prior to all the details being entered into that form. So, for example, if you enter all the information in the web screen, maybe it flows right into that intake form, or otherwise, you're going to have to enter this into that form, right? A retainer letter. So the auditor would ask, okay, if you did go through with creating the file, show me that retainer letter and the following receipt, okay? Fundamentally, show me the conflict check confirmation. How did you determine that there was no conflict? And there's also a document that supplements that decision making. One is to do a conflict screen, and the other is really a conflict screening document. And that's where you physically write down in that document as to why you're justified to deal with that client. Now, this is important, especially if you do feel there's a conflict, but you still want to go ahead with representing them, because that document, and we'll look into it right away, really outlines and gives you the opportunity to explain yourself, okay? Source of contact. So some auditors may actually ask you for the source of contact, which really outlines different means through which you're actually getting clients. You know, it could be referral, could be Law Society referral, could be a Facebook advertisement, could be web advertisement, etc., right? Walk-ins. Now, depending on the logical closure, it's either a golden handshake to the next process of moving it into the file management. And we did actually do a webinar last week on that, which really then talks about creating a file, starting to docket, disperse, invoice, and all that good stuff. But if it stops at a point, either early on or after you create the matter, could be at any time, but you have to non-engage, then of course you do have to generate those non-engagement letters. Now, the non-engagement letters are also created for what are termed as ghost clients. I'll just take a quick minute to give you an example of what that means. So imagine a prospective client walks into your legal office or gives you a phone call and gives you some information. They're saying, you know, this is Marilyn Monroe, and I want to be able to take my neighbor to task. I want to take him to court for poor property management, could be fence issues, could be whatever, right? And they give you some information. Marilyn Monroe from Toronto gives you, her address, phone number, and maybe you do an initial consult, and you're like, this is my arrangement. I'm going to be charging you a flat fee of, $800, taxes included. And Marilyn is like, that's fantastic. Let me get back to you in 2 weeks. Of course, that's a prospective client. It's a lead, however you like to call it. And you follow in a couple of weeks through phone or email saying, hey, Marilyn, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Or it could be someone in your firm that reaches out to her and says, we'd love to understand more if you want to move forward with that retainer or that client agreement that we spoke about, specifically to the case where you mentioned that you wanted to maybe do a small claims matter with your neighbor. Because you have that information. She gave it to you and you noted it down. It's your responsibility now, as part of the Law Society's guideline goes, that if that you are unable to reach that person, Marilyn Monroe. So you really can't reach her, and she's a ghost, true to its term. You can't talk to her. You can't speak with her anymore. She wouldn't respond. She wouldn't call back. No emails, nothing, right? Then it's definitely important that you keep in mind that you do draft a non-engagement letter that outlines saying, thank you so much for calling me a couple of weeks earlier. We spoke about this, such and such. This is the information I have. But of course, we haven't been corresponded for the last whatever time. And hence, I would like to, through this non-engagement letter, make it very clear that I, as the law firm or the lawyer or the legal professional here, I'm no longer responsible for taking up to court, taking this particular matter as part of our firm. And thank you for the opportunity, and goodbye. Right? So that non-engagement letter is very empowering to you, and make that as part of your audit process. It covers not only the legal society, but fundamentally it ensures there's a certain prudence with regards to how your firm has dealt with that situation. So that's really what they call as ghost client. So the non-engagement letter, of course, has two important, I would say, significances with regards to the types of clients that you're dealing with. It could be a ghost client, or it could be a difficult client that you actually did create a matter, but you can't deal with them anymore. Okay? Okay. Now, as I said, certain types of engagements with clients, the tenure of those engagements could vary based on the area of practice. So criminal law could be much longer, could be a family matter that could be longer as well. But for real estate, or maybe a small claims for landlord and tenant, that could be certain short stints, right? But the expectation is, depending again, based on the tenure, I have at least a quarterly update. Or corporate clients. Now, corporate clients are a great example where you're constantly having a connection with them almost on a regular basis. They retain you almost on a monthly basis, and this is a really good example of those types of customers as well. So having a quarterly update with your client with proper statement of activity and accounts. In fact, those corporate clients are a fantastic example for just that line item. Quarterly update with regards to bill of cost and summary. Yearly updates with statement of accounts if this is a criminal matter that's been ongoing. And if a particular matter has been completed successfully, where you've gone through the matter, you've closed the matter, like how we spoke about non-engagement letter being a logical closure to one path. Another path, a very positive path that we all hope and want to move forward with, is actually getting that retainer, docketing, invoicing, moving trust money, or getting paid, and then closing that matter, following with a final statement of settlement accounts. Okay. Certain law firms, in addition to these documents, do outline a well-drafted closure letter. Could be a thank you, could be a gift card, could be many different things that you do for customer appreciation and retention. This is a simple and easy slide. I don't want to spend too much of time on it. I'm going to leave it there so that, for your reading pleasure later when you revisit the webinar, if you do. But the important essence of this particular slide is a question that we were always asked by our clients. Is you have these great documents, there's a lot of compliance aspects to it, but from a pragmatic perspective, how often do I reach out to my client with this kind of information? And that's actually a really good question. Of course, it didn't mean that we had to put such a large slide, but we wanted to be as explanatory as possible, and that's the outcome of this slide. Now, the Law Society, from us having gone through the bookkeeping guidelines of the Law Society and the practice management guidelines of the Law Society of Canada across all provinces, we understand that they highly do recommend having at least a quarterly review. Of course, if you've had shorter reviews prior to that, that's fantastic. But if it's an ongoing matter, then they most certainly recommend having a quarterly review to your client about a particular matter, especially, as I mentioned, if the matter is open. The Law Society does recommend on an annual basis that you send your client the statement of account for both trust and general related accounts. Okay. Now, the Law Society does go one step further in terms of giving some guidelines around the types of documents that you should, of course, keep in mind. One of the first are that of the invoices, receipts for all payments, including retainers, of course, the retainers and client payments, right? So invoices and receipts, ensuring that it's a good correspondence practice based on what you've agreed upon in the retainer letter. We spoke about the quarterly updates with statement of activities, bill of cost. Certain law firms, depending on the nature and the type of client, we've seen also to send out client fee books. In fact, the financial officers of a corporate company may actually ask a law firm for a client fee book, for example. Now, you may actually send an aging report sometimes to your client that outlines any outstanding payments that are due with details about how long they're due for. Okay. 2 final closure letters, and then we added the last line from uLaw ourselves, which is important. Referral business is a big business in various different industries, and the legal business is no exception. So if you do a great job, in fact, if you do a kick-ass job with your client, they're of course going to remember you. We speak about how important it is to emphasize the brand, the power of your brand itself, how people remember that, and slogans and things of that nature. But simple things like sending them a Halloween card, Christmas card. I can't believe we're already there, but I have to say that we're almost there because I just saw Walmart put out their winter clothes, so I'm pretty sure Halloween is around the corner. So those are the types of things in terms of personalizing the law firm's little soft touch with the customer goes a long way. Okay. All right, so in terms of Law Society expectations, that kind of summarizes that. So I want to, maybe in the next 5 to 7 minutes before I jump into being able to showcase a lot of these features as an example using uLaw, I want to touch upon the operational efficiencies and certain aspects of the legal business that you want to keep in mind through managing contacts in general. So your legal business, whether that's a paralegal business, lawyer business, as a legal professional, you come across contacts of information, people with a name, address, phone number, whatever it could be the details of that contact, but you come across various contacts right across the life cycle of you running that business. Of course, a significant part of those contacts could be your clients. Right? They're a majority of your contact information. Just imagine it being an address book. So you have a majority of that address book of being with your clients. And of course, with clients, you have certain special tasks that you have to do, conflict checks, matters, etc. But then you also come across other types of contacts that you deal with. Could be additional parties, could be other parties involved in a particular matter for a client. So you have Marilyn Monroe as a client, but you could actually have Tom Cruise was a witness in that matter. Tom Cruise could be the tenant, and Marilyn Monroe could be the landlord in the LAPD matter. Tom Cruise could have been that neighbor, in which case, depending on the situation, he would either be a plaintiff or a defendant. So there's a certain relationship these contacts have with regards to a file with specific reason to your client. And it's important that you also capture these relationships of contacts within a file. And the reason for that are twofold. One, very important for that information to be not left out because it improvises the conflict screening significance, right? If you've dealt with Tom Cruise as a defendant in a landlord and tenant board, maybe there's a certain piece of information that you've captured that kind of puts you in a bit of a conflict if you were to represent Tom Cruise. What if Tom Cruise comes to you the next day and says, hey, I want you to represent me. I find this lady, Marilyn Monroe, right? And she's just taking me to court. Maybe you're not in the office. Somebody else is in your office. Tom Cruise walks in, right? And you're, of course, you're oblivion to the fact that you've already retained Marilyn Monroe. In that situation, of course, doing that conflict screening with that information is going to make that judgment faster. It's going to make it easier on both parties. And that's why adding those parties and involving those parties as contacts within a matter makes it important. Now, the other aspect to it is for certain areas of practice, in certain jurisdictions, of course, you have certain court forms that have to be filled out. And predominantly in these court forms, you have repetitive information that otherwise need to be filled out manually. Now, it's okay if you're doing it 1 or 2 times, but if you're doing many of these types of files, then of course that all adds up. And then if you factor in human error, and then you have to retype all of this information, that's a challenge too. So tools, including uLaw, give you the flexibility to be able to automate the filling out this information once it understands all the parties involved. Okay? Just reiterating to our audience that today's webinar is titled Law Office Client Management. It's approved for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, New Brunswick, and British Columbia. So managing contacts and having a logical grouping for them also allows your firm to have a better understanding of the various different types of parties involved across your firm. Okay? Okay, so one of the big steps before you create a file for a client, for a prospective client, is really to do that conflict search, right? We're always talking about conflict screens and conflict checks. So how do you go about it? One of the important things to keep in mind, of course, number 1 is to complete a conflict screen. And what that really means is a system or a process where I would be very open to share that using a software for this makes a lot of sense. Because it's okay if you're just starting off and you don't have those many clients, but when those John Smiths add up, you need a system to be able to tell you the relationship that a new John Smith has and what are the conflicts in representing the John Smith, right? So it's really important that you have a system, product or otherwise, to be able to help you do that search. Once you've taken that first step of ensuring that you've done a conflict screening, now the conflict screening itself, the Law Society recommends that you can do it at a few levels. You can check if you're just a firm that's just getting started. Maybe you can do a quick conflict check on the names, right? If Marilyn Monroe doesn't strike a bell at all, just do a quick check on the name. Of course, if you've not come across that, makes sense, right? But if you're a growing firm and you've been in business for a few years, then there's likelihood that you've dealt with a John Doe, then of course then you get a little more granular. That's where tools get very important, because they can do these searches at a granular level at a faster pace without any manual intervention. Then you can start checking if you've come across even a John Doe in other matters. Okay? So once you've done this initial conflict screening and have a general sense for the kind of relationship this prospective client may or may not have had with the firm, then you move on to the next step, is really detailing who within your firm handled this particular call, and that's all part of that template that the Law Society already provides you with, because they really give you a first step, if you will, to get started with filling out the pertinent information that they would hopefully ask for in an audit, right? The information of the client, including address, phone number, email, etc. Of course, in certain silos of practice, right, you may not necessarily know the address of the individual in human rights, or if you're doing any type of work, you may just know, just the name, and that's fine. Whatever information you know, you're going to be able to capture it. Okay? And the good thing is you can always come back, edit that contact, and add more information at a later time. Search results of that conflict search are easily documented. Now, very important is step 4. What steps were taken next needs to be documented too. So this particular form, and we'll jump into this real quick, allows you to explain whether there was a conflict, no conflict. If there's no conflict, what were the steps that you actually retain? What is the next step? Or if there's a conflict, what is the next step? Do you have a logical reasoning for why you still want to represent this client? Or you thought, oh, I don't want to go through the hassle. I'm going to refer this to another colleague of mine. Or maybe you didn't do any referral at all. You just politely thanked the client and did not take that client. Okay? So these are important pieces of information, that particular conflict screening document, that are important for your auditors outlines. So we spoke about the client intake process, the technology aspects of how you can deal with multiple channels. We spoke about the compliance nature of the law societies that govern legal business and their expectations in terms of the types of documents that they would like for you to showcase as part of your audit or as part of your general bookkeeping. We also spoke briefly in our previous slide talking about how you manage these conflict checks, some of the initial steps that you have to take along the way. We spoke about the logical closures to a relationship with the client. And now we're going to talk about certain, again, operational efficiencies that you can build within your business that allows you to have a better conversation with that client, right? It's part of that intake process. It's part of that client management as well. During, let's say, a file management, right? We also spoke briefly about the law, the Law Society's recommendation for how often you are in touch with your client. And we introduce, and this is something we hear and speak about quite often in many other platforms, is the need of the hour, what that advent of technology to help improve the health of a law firm or a legal firm. One of the factors that affects the health of a legal firm, in fact, any business, is cash flow. And one of the reasons for many times the cash flow to be a problem is the lack of knowledge of where it's blocked. Simple reason is you don't track them, you don't measure them. It could be either due to manual process, or it could be a broken system, or it could be multitude reasons why a particular law firm isn't necessarily on top of its game when it comes to collecting the money or moving money from trust to general, whatever the case may be. And what helps, especially if it's a solo business, because there is so much more that has to be dealt with, you're always on the go. There are many different things that you need to take care of. And that's why it's important that you have the right tools that are cost effective, but at the same time very important for your business. So it gives you the relevant information, keeps it at the tip of your toes, and allows you to make, as I said, good, smart conversations with that customer. For example, I know I've been speaking out a lot of jargons and big words, but really what it comes down to is who within my client base that is matters that are still open owes me money. That's a very important question for that cash flow problem. I'm not going to name anyone, but we've actually helped many clients who had newly onboarded into our product when we helped them with helping simple things of transferring money from their trust account into their general account. So the eligible trust transfer were never done, and hence that could be another problem with cash flow too. So unless you get the money from the trust account into your general account, you're not going to see that in your business, right? And you're not going to be able to use that to pay yourself. So it's important that you have the right analytics about the right data that gives you the right information so that you can make smart decisions. We spoke about aging reports. Of course, that's a different format in which the document is expected to lay out the data. But in terms of a solo practitioner who's on the go, who has the phone all the time, not necessarily looking at your laptop or even your iPad these days, everyone's gone mobile with the phone, it's important that information is provided in that device. So the analytic capabilities, whether it's uLaw or other tools that gives you, should enable you to make faster, smarter decisions. So it gives you a list of all the clients who owe you money this month, this week, all the clients, the amount of money, and for how long have they owed you that money, right? Can I just give them that call and walk through what's really happened, or maybe send them an email based on that information? Having that information, having a process to study that information, very important. And of course, we talk about the need for law professionals, legal professionals, to invest in a legal accounting software which encompasses the compliance aspect for both CRA requirements as well as the Law Society's requirements, and combined with a practice management software, whether it's inbuilt or separate, or if it's just an Excel sheet that you use, that's totally fine. But a legal accounting software does give you the capabilities of dealing with compliance, practice management efficiencies, and of course being able to react to your client's needs faster. And before I spend the next 10 to 12 minutes walking you through some examples using uLaw, just a little word from us, as we are a very proud Canadian growing legal accounting and practice management software company based out of Ottawa. And do check us out on our website at uLawPractice.com. So I'm going to quickly shift gears from a presentation mode to walking you through by using uLaw as an example. And what you see here is just a dashboard view or a landing page. And let me just quickly add maybe another dashboard item just to keep it easier. But the idea is to be able to, so we go to dashboard, and I'll say, okay. And of course, there's a web version to uLaw. There's also a mobile app version to uLaw. And this is the next evolution of today's legal professional. Let's say if you're at the courthouse and someone just walks in and says, hey, I really loved the way you represented that client. I actually have a specific problem myself. I would love for you to come in and talk to us about this. Then being able to capture that moment right away is very important, right? So with the mobile app, you're now able to take that client intake right from the phone. You don't have to log into the web version, of course. You could use that to dock it. You could use that for many other aspects to capture the moment faster. So we spoke about one of the first steps being, whether it's through a website, phone, in person, that intake of that client, whether it's through yourself, whether that's through someone in your firm. So let's walk through that simple life cycle and look at the different documents along the way. It should give you a general idea of what you should expect and the types of documents that exist. Whether you templatize it or use a tool that already provides you, that's of course important for you to make that decision. Okay. And as you can see, as a legal firm, you have the opportunity, as I mentioned, add multiple contacts across various different groups. You've got various groups, right, from landlords and tenants, witnesses. You can even personalize these groups for your specific business needs. But we're going to start with the clients. And let's take an example of Marilyn Monroe that we spoke about, someone who gave you information and disappeared. Okay. As well, there was a friend or maybe a newspaper ad. I'm just making it while I'm going. All right, so that information has been provided. You entered that client information. Of course, you would ask for Marilyn's driver's license. Maybe that was not provided at that time. So you basically just save that information. And if this particular person has not come back to you with the information that you've asked for to move her to the next stage, which is really creating a file, you're not going to spend the time till you've done all of that. That person just gave you the information and then has said we'll come back to you and hasn't come back within a specific period of time. We're just going to quickly do what we call as demoting them to a ghost client, which is just moving them down so that you can always promote them back to a client when they do come back. So if you give it a week, 2 weeks, and this person does not show up with the information you need, of course, you can move them down and say, okay, she's currently a client because I assumed she would be at that particular time, but she, of course, hasn't come back to me in so many weeks, so I'm just going to go ahead and say, click on the group, and this could be many different ways that you do it in many different products. In uLaw, you just go ahead and add them to the ghost clients. So if you look at, and again, grouping them makes it easier so that you can always look at all your ghost clients and then make it a checklist if you can to just go after one after the other and provide that non-engagement letter so that it stays you stay compliant, your firm stays compliant, right? We can take that same example and kind of do the next step in the process, which is the conflict screening. And let's take that next step. So you see you have within co-workers, Mr. Abe Diol, you've got Benny Rogers, and then you've got our Marilyn Monroe. Okay. Now, assuming you want to go ahead with the next step, which is really doing a conflict check, you'd go ahead and do a quick conflict screening. Now, you can just check. Fundamentally, you can start off by just checking first name and last name. Like, have you ever come across someone like by the name Marilyn Monroe? Or you can specifically check if you've created matters for someone by the name Marilyn Monroe. Okay. Or you could get further granular by checking, not only should I want to check if I've ever created, but if not, have I ever come across, either as a party or in my notes, such a person at all. So this is, of course, going full 360 degrees. So if I were to kind of give you a conflict screening report, just for the first name and last name, you see there is a conflict, but it's for Monroe Sully. So that kind of conflicted with the last name Monroe, whereas you've dealt with a client by the name Monroe Sully. So maybe there's something to this. The important thing enough for the conflict screening report that it be date stamped, because this is a document that you need to store for this particular client. So let's go to that second version of that conflict screening. Fantastic. So you've got Monroe Soli, but now when we searched up for the matter, of course, there is a matter that was created for a fence issue between Monroe and Stefan. Okay? Makes it even more interesting because now you can use the quick view or any faster other tools may offer you a way for you to search up that information. Right? It has a file number, so it's MS198195. So you can pretty much use that. And of course, you can do a deeper dive into that file. Right? So this is how you would start to investigate really based on what that initial conflict screening tells you before you actually go and create that file for this Marilyn Monroe. Okay. So once you have determined, and this is the important step where this is done by yourself, by your firm, based on your judgment, whether you want to go forward with creating a file and representing Miss Marilyn Monroe. Now here is the third report. Of course, the third report does not talk about any other matters. Okay. So here is that Monroe Sully matters, small claims, and then you do the due diligence check, and then let's assume you've determined that there are no conflicts in representing Marilyn Monroe. You go ahead and create a file. Okay? So you create a matter, and this is where we spoke about understanding the nature and scope of the matter. We spoke about getting some more details with regards to what this means. So you could just say Marilyn versus Tom. It could be that same issue. So this could be anything. This could be a landlord and tenant. So it really comes down to the relationship of the parties involved in that particular matter. Okay. Now let's say you have created the file and you're waiting for that retainer. You've signed in a retainer letter. We spoke about the retainer letter. There's of course many samples that we offer, but I'm sure you have your own samples that we can templatize and bring into the system. But let's assume you have signed up and, okay, I guess there's a question around the retainer letter. So we do have a few samples ourselves, which you can generate in Word that allows you to tweak it. Let's say you sent that retainer letter and this person has not responded back. And as part of that compliance document, you do have certain samples. So you could actually sign up a non-engagement letter right now. This is where I said you've created a file. This is not a ghost client, really. This is a client who you've taken the file intake, but they're not responding, or for whatever reason, you want to non-engage them. And there it is. So this is a template provided by the Law Society that makes it simpler enough where it's pre-populated with your information, with your client's information, and allows you to just make quick decisions, sign it, and mail it or email it. Of course, you could store all of these documents. That's a common question. You could connect it with Google Drive or OneDrive on the cloud, and you can basically just go ahead, drag and drop all these documents. We automatically create the folder for you in your Google Drive, right under your Google Drive, under uLawPractice. But I'm just answering that because I know that's a common question. All of these digitized PDFs documents can be saved in the cloud right under uLaw. Okay? So we spoke about that. So if I were to really go back to the contacts, so once that's done, if you're not engaged Marilyn Monroe, then that's the end of that closure. But if you're going to move forward with creating the file, you know, she's given you that $800 retainer, Then, of course, you're going to move into the next phase, which is the file management, where you would intake that particular $800 retainer, right? You're going to basically go ahead and accept that retainer, and we've dealt with this in many other examples in the past. Take the retainer, give Marilyn Monroe the retainer receipt, identify how they paid you, and of course, Law Society expects you to give them a retainer receipt for that $800 that she paid you. Okay? So if this is a positive flow of the client, then the types of documents in terms of compliance remains to be the same. You can be audited within the first 12 to 18 months after being in practice. If you do it as a discipline, as and when it happens, then you're ready right from the get-go. So we've kind of compiled all of the compliance documents under this one panel. So here's the client ID verification document we talk about. And this is a template provided by the Law Society. You could have your own client intake. And I'll probably take just a few more minutes. So we create a digital folder on the cloud where you can simply drag and drop all of these documents as and when you create them. You could have authorization letter. We spoke about the statement of activities, bill of costs. All of that is readily available, whether you do it as and when it happens or even at the time of audit. It's available for you to right away get into. Okay? So when I drag and drop all those documents into that digital folder on the cloud, it's of course come down to the same file. So if I were to look at the verification document right from here, it pretty much gives you the opportunity to, has all the information from whatever it's been provided thus far. And this is where you can determine if you've got their driver's license, birth certificate, right? And if you've actually got their driver's license scanned, you can actually bring that in as well. I'm just going to take a random example. So I've got this driver's license of Mr. Bean, my favorite character. That becomes part of that, record keeping. So when the auditor asks you, all right, show me the client verification, you would fill out that form, sign it, and then attach it with, and have the driver's license along, then those are the types of answers they want. Right? So you click on it, the auditor is looking for the driver's license. Of course, that's not Marilyn Monroe, but you get the point. Okay? So that's how you would go about ensuring that the client intake moves from that process stage to the next stage of the file management. We spoke about the source of contacts. Okay, so right at the stage when you've just done Marilyn Monroe, you've got compliance right within the client intake process. Okay, what is the conflict screening? You can generate branded letters and envelopes, labels, etc. Simple, pragmatic office management tools. But the important document that I would draw your attention to is the source of contacts. It's not specific to Marilyn Monroe, but it's more specific to the whole overall client intake function of your business. But for the month of September, if I really want to understand where have I got my different contacts, sources of contacts from, then this document should tell you that. So here's that envelope. You can brand this. You can have your logo, all that cool stuff. And here is that source of contact. It says 50% of all my clients came through newspaper advertisements, 25% came through referral, a personal referral, and then 25% came through Law Society. There's one Mr. Abhi Sanjeev for whom I don't know, where that came from. And if you do understand that at a later time, you can go ahead, search up that client, and edit his contact. Okay? The cool thing about it is, again, you should look up our webinar on our mobile platform. You can do the same client intake right from our mobile app. Okay, using the same login information, you should be able to do that right off the mobile platform. So with that, I will draw this webinar to closure. And the essence of today's webinar, of course, was to reiterate the whole client intake process, the different tools and the processes that you have to keep in mind, the different Law Society compliance documents that you need to keep in mind, the obligations, the expectations from auditors, also keeping in mind how you manage the life cycle of these clients through one stage of being a client, a prospective client, a ghost client, a client who you not engage, or a client that you walk through the entire life cycle of that matter. Okay. Okay, there's one last question before I wrap up, and that's around my analytics. I've not forgotten that, so thanks for reminding me. And this is available on the mobile platform as well. So this is where you can understand, I want to understand my fee book by client. Who are my top paying clients? I want to understand expenses. Who are the clients for whom I spend a lot? Maybe you're taking them out for lunch, dinner, you're recording that. Because uLaw is also a business accounting software. It also captures all your office expenses. Right? Keeps a tab on that. So it says, okay, Mr. Philippe Desai has about $1,000 worth of revenue. You've got Mr. Nishikori for $900. You could even know who are the clients to whom you provide pro bonos. Very important document. Something to know more about your clients. And if you want to do a granular search, this is the last document I'll show you today, is the aging. I think this was the question. This is a document that you generate for your own firm, or you could do it specifically for a client and then send that information to that client. Okay? Okay, so I understand I've gone way past my bar game time, so I'm going to, hopefully I'll be able to answer that by email back to you, but I've probably wrapped this webinar up today. So once again, thank you very much for participating in this webinar. If you have any further questions with regards to this webinar, do kindly email us at support@uLawPractice.com. Do visit your individual Law Society websites. And once again, the title for today's webinar is Law Office Client Management, and it's for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. So once again, thank you very much. Hope you have a great weekend ahead, and we will see you next Friday. Thank you.